Hey guys, just want to go over the parts of an ecosystem packet with you. So I'm just going to read along with you and hopefully bring some clarification. So the first part says an ecosystem has many different factors that make it up. Abiotic factors are the non-living parts of the environment, such as rocks, soil, water, and air. Biotic factors are living parts of an environment, such as producers, consumers, and decomposers. So for the chart here, it's asking you to complete it with indicating whether or not something is abiotic or biotic. So again, if we're taking a look at these terms, bio means living. So a biotic factor is going to be a living thing. Abiotic, the prefix a meaning not. So abiotic, not living. So you have grass, carbon dioxide, pH, predator, and parasite. And you have to indicate whether or not it's biotic or abiotic. Then for number 2, complete the chart below using the picture. So they're asking you to list whether or not something is abiotic. Again, abiotic meaning non-living, biotic meaning living. And in the picture, you have the sun, wind, trees, deer, rocks, soil, water, fish, butterfly. Now, for the second part of this, we've already discussed what a species is. A species is any type of organism that is capable of reproducing and creating viable offspring. Now, viable offspring means that their offspring are then able to reproduce with another of the same species. An example of a species might be mice. A group of the same species that live in the same area or habitat is a population. An example of a population would be all the mice that live in North Babylon. A community is all the species that live and interact together in an area. So now, when we're going from a population to a community, we're still dealing with all of the living things. An example of a community would be all the birds, bees, mice, dogs, cats, humans, etc. that live in North Babylon. An ecosystem is defined as all the living and non-living parts of an environment and how they interact. So once you get into an ecosystem, this is when you're bringing in both the living and the non-living. So it's the biotic and the abiotic factors. So use the paragraph here to then answer what is the definition of a community, an ecosystem, a population, and a species. Now, again, using that same paragraph, let's complete the sentences with the following terms. So you have ecosystem, population, and community for 7, 8, and 9. Any healthy ecosystem is stable. The more biodiversity that you find in an ecosystem, the more stable it is going to be. Biodiversity is defined as different types of organisms that live in the same area. Again, going back to bio meaning living and diversity meaning variety. So if you put those two terms together, the amount of different types of organisms living in the same area. So think about a desert and an ocean. They're both considered to be ecosystems. However, the desert has far fewer organisms than that of the ocean. If there were to be a major change in the environment, there's a better chance that the ocean would have some of the species survive than the desert. This provides stability. So again, you're using the paragraph to define what is biodiversity. And then I'm asking you, in your opinion, what do you think would be more stable, grassland or a forest? A habitat is where an organism lives. Do not confuse a habitat with an organism's niche. A niche is a unique position that an organism holds in its environment. Now, I want to point out to you guys that habitat and niche are two terms that the Regents loves to put on there, and they like to differentiate between the two. So a niche would include where an organism lives, which is the habitat, what it eats, what eats it, basically anything that you can use to describe an organism. So, for example, cows live in grasslands, they eat grass, they provide milk, and they're eaten for hamburgers. If two organisms occupy the same niche, this is when you're going to see competition. Now, when we start to talk about competition, we get into evolution a little bit right there. So for 12, and they're asking you to differentiate between habitat and niche. And then 13 is again going back to the idea of competition. So if you have a warbler finch that eats animal food and a ground finch that eats mainly plant food, would you expect them to be in the same niche? Why or why not? When there's a natural disaster, such as a volcano, and an ecosystem is destroyed, it needs time to return to what it was. This is called ecological succession. Ecological succession is a series of changes in an ecological community that occur over time after a disturbance. Now, a lot of times with the Regents, they will either describe ecological succession and ask you to identify what it is, or they're going to show you a picture. Now, the picture that's listed here, this is basically what ecological succession looks like. So you have nothing, and then grasslands, and then little by little, it will become, whatever it's supposed to be. The first organism to appear after a disaster is called the pioneer species. Lichens and moss are the most popular example of a pioneer species. Lichens and moss get the ecosystem ready for the next organism, which typically is going to be the grasses. If a forest were destroyed by a natural disaster, as long as the climate remains the same, with enough time, it should return back to a forest. So when you destroy an ecosystem, as long as the climate doesn't change, it should always return back to what it was. So then I'm going to ask you guys to define ecological succession. What are the two most popular pioneer species? And then if a lake ecosystem is destroyed by a drought, what will it eventually become as long as the climate remains the same?